Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Fresh Squeezed Gallery Talk. My name is Amanda Cooper, and we are really excited to hear from three of our Fresh Squeezed artists tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and before we hear from the artists, which is why we're here tonight, I wanted to give a little background about our Fresh Squeezed project and about the Morian in general. So here is a picture of the Morian Art Center in case you have not been here before. The Morian was founded in 1917, so we're over 100 years old. We're one of the oldest arts institutions in the South. And we have several locations. This is on Central Avenue in downtown St. Pete. This is what we kind of call the mothership. And across the street from this building is the Chihuly Collection, which the Morian owns and operates. It's a permanent installation of Dale Chihuly's world famous glass. We also have the Morian Glass Studio, which is a working hot shop where artists make glass sculptures, and you can see live glass blowing demonstrations. And last but not least, we have about a mile away from this building here, we have the Morian Center for Clay, which is an historic train station, and it is the oldest working pottery and the largest, I'm sorry, working pottery in the Southeast. So it's a pretty big organization. And where Fresh Squeezed came up, I didn't ask, I'm assuming everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
My screen. Okay, thank you. Fresh Squeeze started as an idea back in 2017 when we were celebrating our 100th anniversary. We were thinking of things that the Morian has done for the last century, and part of that is working with emerging artists. So we wanted to start a program where we do that. We've been doing it organically for 100 years, but we wanted to create a program where we would do it more intentionally. So Fresh Squeeze was born. So it started in 2017. This is now our 7th year. And it's one of my favorite projects as the chief curator for the Morian. I just love working on this project. And basically the premise is we put out a call for entry, and it's a statewide exhibition. It's not just the Tampa Bay area where we're located, it's statewide. And we put out a call for entry every year, and we get about 120 to 150 entries from artists from across the state. And each year we select 6 artists to be in the show. So to date, we have exhibited 42 artists from 19 different Florida cities, everywhere from Miami all the way to Pensacola. So it truly is a statewide exhibition. And our only criteria for this show in terms of being an emerging artist is we're looking for artists who have never had a solo show in the state. And we don't count BFA or MFA exhibitions. So basically any artist who has been in this show has not, this is their first solo show in the state of Florida outside of an academic institution. So real quickly, I wanted to go through kind of the history of the last few years. This was the inaugural Fresh Squeeze, which, like I said, was in 2017. This is one of the artists. His name is Brian Feldman, and he lived in Orlando at the time. Now he's living in Washington, D.C. And he's a performance artist, and he took the title of Fresh Squeeze very seriously. And he did a performance piece where he was in the gallery on the weekends. And if you were to draw a picture of an orange or of a glass of orange juice or him squeezing a glass of orange juice, you would get a free glass of orange juice. So, and then he displayed the drawings in his space. It was really fun. So it's funny when every year when we have this show, people think that he's going to be there because they equate Fresh Squeeze with what he was doing. Like, no, he was just an artist that was doing something amazing for the first year. This is an artist from Fresh Squeezed 2. We had another 6 artists that year, and this is Katrina Sarah. She was a photographer from Palm Beach. And after she was in the show, she went on to win the South Florida Cultural Consortium fellowships, which is a big prize, one of the biggest prizes that the government puts out every year for artists in South Florida. This is Tanae Hart, her space from Fresh Squeezed 3 back in 2019. She is from Tallahassee and she is a professor of art at FSU. Fresh Squeezed 4, this show opened right before we closed down for the pandemic in 2020, and we got to have an opening reception. And this is Lusa Molnar, who is from DeLand, and she is a professor of art at Stetson University. Fresh Squeezed 5, this is Bridget Couvert, who lives in Palm Harbor. She's actually a creative writing professor for St. Pete College, and she does these fabulous glue and resin sculptures. And this is Fresh Squeezed 6 from last year. This is Eugene Aguet, who is an artist who was working on his MFA at the University of Florida in Gainesville when we were working with him. And now he's gotten a fellowship to be a professor at Alfred University in New York in the fall. So he's really excited about that. So it's an honor to have worked with all these artists over the years, and it's fun to see the connections that they have made with each other over the years. Like some artists from different years know artists that were in it from previous years. So it's just kind of created a little community of artists, which I think is terrific, and it's fun to watch the trajectory of these artists' careers. Also, a side note, if any artist is watching this and is interested in applying, Fresh Squeezed 8 is coming up in April of 2024. And the call for entry usually comes out in August, and the deadline is usually in November. So keep an eye out for that. I would like to thank our sponsors, Lisa and Perry Everett, who are longtime community friends of the Morahan Art Center. And the Gobioff Foundation has been a founding sponsor, and we're very thankful to them. Another side note, if you are an artist watching this who lives in the Tampa Bay area, the Gobioff Foundation has some great micro grants for artists in any discipline working on projects. So I would encourage you to Google them, find their website, and look for those micro grants. And also DFCU Financial and Smith and Associates Real Estate. We couldn't put on this project without them. Another little PSA. We're hearing from 3 of our artists tonight, and there's 6 artists in the show. So the other 3 artists, Deborah Perlman, KJ Skidmore, and Laura De Valencia, will be speaking virtually on Thursday, June 8th. So please join us again for that. So without further ado, we're going to hear from 3 of the 6 artists in Fresh Squeeze tonight. And the first one up is Denise Treizman, who is coming to us from Miami. We'll be hearing from her in just a minute. And then after Denise is Leeann Ray, who is in the show coming to us from Orlando. And last but not least, we're going to hear tonight from Latonya Hicks, who is the artist who is representing us from our own Pinellas County. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them. And if you're watching this, and if you have any questions for any of the artists tonight, you can type them in the chat or just save them. We'll address any questions you have for any of the artists after all 3 of them have spoken. I think that is all I had. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Denise, it's all yours. Hi, Denise. You are muted, I think.
Now?
Yeah, yes.
Hi, everyone. I apologize for my voice. I have a big cold, but I'm making an effort to talk as much as I can. And thank you for being here. Let me share my screen. Hold on. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Great. We did it. So my name is a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Santiago in Chile. And I moved to the US in 2010. I spent some years in San Francisco, and then I went to grad school in New York at the School of Visual Arts. And then I stayed there for almost 10 years. And then I had a huge life change. I had 2 kids. I met my husband. We lived in Israel, and now we're in Miami. Woo. That's a lot of the very quick intro. But anyways, I'm very new to Florida. I guess this is my second year in the state. I have a studio at Laundromat Art Space in Miami, which is a very nice community. And we're also having artist open studios for Miami-Dade County. If anybody who's seeing this can stop by, everybody is opening up their studios. Anyways, that's a quick picture from what I've set up for this Saturday. So a little bit of background. So my first attempt to sculpture was in the streets of New York with found objects. I would create a lot of street interventions that were meant to be ephemeral. I mean, it could be seen as a performative action, but I was not interested in that, but more the photograph that I would take of it. And at the time, I didn't really know what it was, but I think it was what actually allowed me to develop a language that mixed painting and sculpture, and a freedom in treating any material or surface as if it were going to be discarded, if it makes any sense. So these are just some examples, and these were things I would just make as part of my routine. It wasn't like, oh, today I'm going to go make interventions. I kind of walked around, grabbed things, and sometimes I would feel the impulse to make one of these if it was calling me. These are some examples of my drawings. So in relationship to that, I mean, it's kind of the same gesture evolving into paper, or mark making with an object, a found object. So a lot of work, my work has a lot to do with mark making, and I try to think of any medium, surface, object as like equivalent, and not think that one thing has a higher ranking, or because it's like a canvas or something more refined than a trash bag, if it makes any sense. This is a show I had in New York, Cuchifritos Gallery, and the show was all about working with objects that I gathered in the 4 streets that surrounded the gallery space. And again, the objects were sculptures in itself, but the whole room functioned as an installation. So in a way, the objects again were mark making in the space and creating connections between each other, which is also something I deal with a lot, is like whether a piece exists as an individual thing or in relationship to everything else that's in the room. And the placement is very important for me in this, and that's what allows me to create these relationships that are, of course, sometimes very formal or material based. And this was an installation, a show I had at Wave Hill in the Bronx. It's called Hasta la Vista Maybe. So these were all my objects that I kept in a storage unit since I moved to New York, basically in the 2010, and this show was in 2016, maybe. So I brought all the objects that I had no idea what was in there. I brought them into the gallery space, created this installation that was kind of in conflict and conversation with the nature, because this is a very beautiful, botanical garden place. So the show was called Hasta la Vista Maybe, because basically all the materials that I didn't use went to trash, and everything that I used in the show went back to the storage unit, and there it is. So that's kind of an ongoing project that I plan to keep pursuing if there's funding for it, because now everything's in New York and it's a little bit harder. These are more detailed shots of it. So it's a mixture of, things that are very iconic to like the taxi bumper, and other things are just mine, or things that might, usually the objects that I use are not things that have like a personal significance to me. It's more like I expect people to give, I expect the viewer to finish the story. So they're not like, I hate to use the word collect, for example, because I don't think I'm collecting ever. I'm just like accumulating. So if that makes me a hoarder, maybe, but I usually avoid that word. This is a public sculpture in New York too, at Randall's Island, commissioned by the Bronx Museum. And this was my first and only public sculpture to date, and everything was meant to be interactive, but without indications. There were no prompts, like people could feel free to use any of these. They were all scattered throughout the park, so they were not all next to each other. So Spartan Follies, like, like those Spartan races or something, you would just jump, you just like encounter one of these somewhere. And like everything in my work, everything gets reused. So that PVC tube was actually in the park, and then I kept it. And years later, I've used it at Art in Odd Places in 14th Street in New York, in this festival, in which I had friends perform with me, and this was also my only performance ever. And the idea was that everybody had to help me schlep this object in reference to my own relationship with objects, but also something that's pretty of the vernacular of New York City, because everybody's carrying weird objects in the subway, or so anybody can relate to it. In this show, the marshmallow method included a lot of installation, more fibers, which is kind of what I've gotten into lately. There's also a lot of ceramics, like if you see on the right, those are details. So ceramics were the marshmallow, something artificially created to complete the installation. So it's like the piece that I couldn't find, but I wish would exist in the world. And for a while, I mean, I love ceramics. At this juncture, I'm not doing it, but again, this idea that there is no difference between that ball that's deflating, that has been used in 10 installations or pieces, and something handcrafted that's obviously could have a different value, but I just treat everything in the same manner. This is my first weaving, actually. I went to a residency. There was a loom. There was a resident there that told me, oh, you should weave. And at the time I was making ceramics and I didn't have anything. I'm like, weave how? And she's like, just push this pedal, push the other one. And I just had a lot of bubble wrap paper because I was gonna wrap my ceramics in that. And this is what came up. And it opened up a world of possibilities. I brought this back to my studio at the time for open studios, and people were asking me, oh, where did you find that rug? And I was so offended because I had put so much time in making it, but then I actually thought it was good because it meant that it really fit the rest of the work that I was doing. Like it didn't feel like a separate body of work or something. And ever since then, I've incorporated a lot of the weavings. Sometimes the weaving itself is like the core component of the installation. This is me with my loom that I acquired. I have several of these. It's a little one, but like just to show my commitment to this new medium. Now I have my own loom, so again, it allows me to, it feels less precious too, because I can make many weavings. Like when I didn't own my loom, I felt like, oh, where am I gonna do it? I have to go to a residency to find a loom. So having access to everything also is like frees your mind. This is an installation with a huge weaving. This is 12 yards long, and at a place that was gonna be demolished in Miami. This is the first artwork I made since I moved to Miami. The weaving I had made at Mass MoCA years before the residency, but everything gets reused. And this had been shown in 2 shows, but it gets reused, and every time it'll look different. And this is my most recent show at the University Galleries of Illinois State University, where it felt really cohesive in the sense that all of my pieces had light and weaving. Light is something that I've always been attracted to, and I find it to be a very desirable, especially these are not even neon, it's LED lights. So it's really more junk, but desirable. And again, in this conversation of consumerism, but at the same time acknowledging that my work would not exist without it. So it's not only now found objects, I also purchase materials. So I'm trapped in the same loop of consumerism. And I think most people can relate to that, because we're all like, oh, why do we need that? But we still want it. So that's where the work is coming from. So these are some close-ups. I mean, they're never gonna be one thing. They're still found objects. And again, a lot of these objects keep reappearing. Like when I take this piece apart, the objects become objects again, the weaving becomes an object, and everything can be recombined in a new form. Or it could be shown exactly the same way, but usually it mutates. So these are more details. So another piece from that show. And these are my the latest works I've been making here in my studio. They're pretty large, and they all have a big weaving component and light on the same line of that show, the last show I had last year. I have been exploring a lot of volume in the work by using, wire mesh and objects that give volume to it, as opposed to other older pieces that were a little bit more flat on the wall to the floor. And these works have been shipped because I will be exhibiting them at the Orlando Museum. And this June, it opens June 2nd, if anyone's in Orlando, Leeann, and maybe someone else. But yeah, it's super exciting because I've been nominated to this prize by the museum. It's the Florida Artist Prize. So I will have like a big room to exhibit a lot of works. So if you're in the area, hopefully you can come say hi or see it, because it lasts until August, I think. So that's it. I guess I will stop sharing my screen, and I succeeded in speaking with this voice.
Thank you, Denise. I know you're not feeling 100%. That was great. And you shared your screen, yay.
Yay.
So next, we're going to hear from Leann Ray.
Yeah, that was great, Denise. I'm definitely going to go. I've been to all the Florida prizes since I've moved here, and they're all always like breathtaking. Awesome. So I'm so excited to see some more of your work.
Yeah, I get to meet you.
So in contrast to Denise, my work is all black and white, so I'm losing all the color. So before I get started, I want to thank Amanda and your wonderful staff for making the show a success and for making everything so seamless. This is one of the most seamless shows I've ever been in. Like everything's just been easy and taken care of, so I'm very, very thankful. So my name is Leeann Ray. I'm an artist based in Central Florida. My work focuses on drawing, and in this talk, I'll share some of my background, insight into my work, and where my work is currently headed. Okay. I didn't check. You can see my screen, right? You got me nervous. Okay.
Yeah.
So starting with my background, my family moved to Margate, Florida in 1999, and I was raised in Margate, in that Margate home. And many of the experiences that I had in that home continue to surface into this current body of work. You might see some of the stuff in the background of this photo kind of resurface a little bit. I'm pulling from all of these memories from this home. So I left Margate in spring of 2018 to start my schooling at UCF. I got my BA in studio art in 2020, a very fun time. And I got my MFA in studio art and design at UCF very recently, a couple weeks ago now. So the MFA program at UCF challenged me to be a better speaker, writer, and maker. In addition to this, this program gave me my first official studio space that was completely mine. Before this, I had carved out a little corner in one of the drawing rooms when I was an undergrad that I was like not allowed to do, but I did anyway. But this was mine. This was my first space. This space gave me the ability to make large and impactful work, and it also helped me develop a studio practice that has been fruitful for me and that I can't see myself stopping. So this is the first drawing that I created for that thesis body of work. And when I first began this drawing, my intentions were to only create a sense of confidence, as the work I was making before this had no confidence, in my opinion. So to do this, I was studying a lot of Albrecht Dürer. I love his etchings. I find myself drawn to them because of these Christ-like figures that consume the page and exert confidence. But after working on this drawing for some time, I realized that this drawing, Dead Memories, was more about memory and recalling specific memories rather than confidence. And after I finished this drawing, I was really launched into this idea of memory. I began to wonder if my memories were correct or if I had gotten details incorrect in my memories. The drawing on the previous slide was made almost entirely from a photograph. And to challenge my memory, I made this drawing, I don't remember everything, almost entirely from memory or imagination. I was interested in what details would get lost in this process, such as the lamp fading into the background in this drawing. I next created this diptych, The Bed in Your Shadow. Both these drawings are made entirely from memory, as the bedroom that they take place in is no longer available to me, but the events that transpired in the bedroom continue to persist in my memories. I chose in this drawing to specifically omit the figure, as I wanted to create a narrative that would potentially portray the viewer as a perpetrator. So playing with how a viewer interprets and engages with my drawings is something that I'm always interested in and is something that I'm still playing with now. This drawing, It Never Ends, does just that. This drawing is a somewhat plausible space and is quite literally life-sized. I made it purposefully the exact same length and width as the wall that I was creating it on. So it would be like a room, something that is plausible. But there's a warped perspective and there's strange elements in the drawing, such as the massive figures in the bottom left, or the figure in the foreground, or even the looming shadow in the background. And that gives the viewer some insight that this drawing is meant to be a mindscape. It's meant to depict the imagery within my mind and the memories of my mind. Towards the end of my MFA program, I also became interested in depicting memories of those closest to me. This drawing and the one on the next slide are meant to depict a memory that my father shared with me. In both drawings, I'm using myself as a vessel to tell the story. And this is the first two drawings where I did that. So both these drawings were created after a trip to Massachusetts that my father and I took in the summer of 2022. During this trip, my father filled my head with tons and tons of stories, as fathers do. But one that really stuck out to me was the story where my father was my grandfather's caretaker. He would constantly come and bring him groceries and check on him. And he told me that his father had a bird, and that his bird would repeat all the stories that his friends would drunkenly share the night before. So he was almost embarrassed hearing the bird sharing these stories. My dad shared tons of stories with me, but he never once mentioned a bird. So I became obsessed with the bird. And I made a bunch of drawings of this bird and a bunch of drawings from that story from my father. That was the first instance where I truly did that. So I found that even if I have a very specific memory tied to a drawing, a viewer can come to a drawing and imbue their own memories into it. So this drawing, Mom, Max, and Fireball, even though it has a very specific memory for me, a viewer can come to this drawing and imagine or remember a memory of themselves as a child helping a mother figure out in a kitchen. And that's what I'm most interested in when I'm interacting with people at any of the shows that I've been in lately. The first thing they do is they say, oh, that reminds me of my aunt, or that reminds me of my mom, and that reminds me of my dad. And it strikes up a conversation about memory just inherently. And it's really wonderful. So the next few drawings are kind of like a change from the last few. They're not just about singular memories, they're about multiple memories layered together. So I like to think of my work as this pendulum that shifts between moments of clarity and moments of abstraction, where memories can recede and emerge as they wish. So this drawing course of memories has both distant memories and past, both present and distant memories, such as a memory of Hurricane Ian, where I was actually flooded and I lost my apartment. I was displaced for about a month. But it also has distant memories of when I was very, very young in that house in Margate. So they're all combined together. And I'm more so thinking about design choices rather than giving the viewer one specific narrative. This drawing does that as well. This one has memories about when I developed COVID and eventually asthma from that COVID infection, which has made drawing very difficult. And I've been using a lot of ink because of it. The charcoal dust is not good for your lungs, it turns out, but I'm making creative solutions. But I'll also use fond memories. So I have a drawing of a roadrunner bird that I came across at a zoo that was following me around at the zoo, and I was absolutely enamored with it. I also drew my friend Teresa as a statue in the bottom, kind of almost bottom corner. Just because I love her so much. And I was like, let's make her look at me. So all these memories, whether they be distant past or present, or even mundane, happy, or traumatic, they all can collide with each other on one flat picture plane. And I really love this process. So I think of these drawings as very intuitive as I'm working on them. As soon as a memory surfaces or an idea surfaces, I let it make its way into the drawing. This drawing, as I was working on it, it was completely different. It was actually upside down. It was the other way around. And it just had a doorway with a figure in it. And then I was like, I should make this about my grandmother, turned it upside down and made it about my grandmother. So like I said, my work is like a pendulum. So I made this drawing soon after those. So I created this drawing because I was seeking clarity, right? I was in this crazy space. I made those drawings while I was actually unhoused from Hurricane Ian. And I made this drawing as soon as I got an apartment. And I remember that feeling of getting my bed installed and just laying down and relaxing and finally having a bed again. And I had to make a drawing about it to show that sense of clarity in my life and that sense of clarity in my drawings as well. So what am I working on now that I've finished my MFA? I'm all done. So now that I've finished my time at UCF, I've had to leave that studio space that was given to me. But thankfully, things worked out and I have a spare bedroom in this new apartment. So it was pretty easy to migrate to a new studio space. And I've surprisingly found that I really like working at home. Whenever I want to take a break, I can snuggle with my cat. It's amazing. I totally recommend it. The only constraint to this new studio space is that the walls are a lot smaller and the room is really awkwardly sized. There's like little hole. It's weird. So my drawings are shrinking in size, which is a good and a bad thing. So this is the first drawing that I made in that new space. And just like the one previous that I mentioned where I was turning it a bunch, this one's just like that. This one actually started vertical and it was a portrait of a friend of mine and it wasn't working. So I brought it to my new studio and turned it horizontally and made a new drawing right on top. This is one of the smaller works that I've been working on, and I found that the smaller works that I'm working on right now are quicker and more playful. These drawings are made in about an hour or so. They're using no reference, only imagination and memory. They're really, really fun to make. And I'm really interested in getting some ideas and memories on paper and expanding on them later. This is one of those drawings as well that I'm really interested in right now. This one's about my grandmother's memory. She was somewhat recently diagnosed with dementia, and I've been constantly interested in what she does and doesn't remember. Every time I go and visit her in Massachusetts, I ask her tons of questions, and there's weird things like she'll remember raising my mother, but she doesn't remember that I'm her granddaughter. It's very, very interesting to me. So I'm kind of working through that in this drawing. And then the last thing that I've been thinking about is these geese. So I've been going on lots and lots of walks because I finally have time now that I'm out of grad school. And every time I go on a walk, I am chased and harassed by these African geese. They are overly aggressive and super territorial, and I love them so much. So there's something about these geese that I really do see in myself. Perhaps it's this little ugly notch that they have on their heads, or even their abrasive personality. But I really love these geese, and they're really fun to draw. If you ask me any questions about the geese, I'll just like word vomit how much I love them. On my walks, I've also unfortunately encountered some deceased animals, including the geese. And that's been a very sad thing to come across, but I had to make a drawing about it. So this is one of the drawings about the geese. And this is my most recent drawing where, if you can't tell by the size, I'm really missing working large, so I made it work. This one is supposed to be an allegorical self-portrait because as I said, I see myself as these geese. So that's where I'm at. And if you guys want to connect or look at any other work, you can go to my website or Instagram. I think that's all I got for you guys.
Thanks, Leeann. That was amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously you and Denise, you both have very different work, although I love how both of you at one point went very large scale. But you both said at one point during your talks in your own way, that how you make your work in a certain way where you want the viewer to kind of complete it in a way. So I think that's a very interesting correlation, even though visually your work is, of course, very, very different. So. And thank you so much for that. And last but not least, Latonya, if you're ready, we'll hear from you.
Okie dokie, artichoke.
Hi, Latonya.
Hi. Can you guys see?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name's Latonya Hicks, and there's my beautiful assistant, Patty Cake Jackson, the third. I forgot the third on there. He is always willing to stay up late and work with me and help me make that magic happen. So it was wonderful hearing everybody talk about their experience, and my experience has been kind of different in that I went to Florida State for science at first, but then I switched to art, and it was an amazing experience switching. I had no regret, and I went to grad school, and I was really producing, and I was excited about that. And then I became a teacher, and all of that kind of creative energy that I had, I was giving it away for years and years and years and years. So I kind of took a hiatus. I would make art, but I made it kind of in secret. In my house, and it stayed in my house, or my close friends kind of knew about it, but that's about it. And I would give all of the magic that I had, the sparkles, the glitter, to my students. So recently someone kind of gave me that spark and said, Latonya, you need to be doing, practicing what you preach. So I have kind of relit that match and reminded myself of how much I love making and producing and all of that. So I'm like in a little bit of a different place, but I loved hearing about everyone else's journey. So I'm going to do a little bit of like, you're not supposed to read to people, but you're going to get it anyway. Sorry. So this is my statement, and it's important, and I'm reading it because it has so much information in it about where I come from and where my aesthetic and how I ended up where I am today. So it says, drawing in an obsession with objects as an accumulation of human experience and personal references, I create densely layered figurative compositions from my dragon's hoard. I collect. I'm a collector. I collect everything, especially if my eye is drawn to it. My eye is most often drawn to cultural symbols, shiny objects, and artifacts that evoke the comfort of resting in my grandmother's kitchen with her draped in brightly patterned dresses, indicative of the 60s and the 70s. She wore these like polyester dresses that had these, you know, wonderful mod kind of patterns on them. And I was obsessed with them. I love them. During my formative years, I struggled to feel enough around my extended family. My grandmother's house in Macon was always a safe place where my Blackness was never called into question, where my existence, my femininity, my beauty, my speech patterns were enough. I didn't have to worry about, you know, sounding a certain way, using the right terminology, using the right, you know, vocabulary, like all of that was enough, you know, and these pictures, I included them because I have all these wonderful memories. My parents would send us to Macon, Georgia, and we would be there for the whole summer. And we would play under the houses. And I refer to my friends, I tell them, you know, the houses were on stilts. And so this is not her house, but this is kind of what it was like. Like they were on these brick stilts. That's the best way I can describe it. And there were these amazing like furnaces, fire thingamabobbers in the bottom right corner in the houses. There were these objects that I never saw before and I haven't seen since that became kind of a part of my visual language. And I love it. So for years, my style of dress was private documentation of my desire to pay homage to that safety. She made me feel welcome. It was a safe place for me. And all of those objects in her home made me feel welcome as well. And so later on, I didn't have those. So I'd scour thrift stores and flea markets and pretty much anywhere I could find those kinds of objects that made me feel, that kind of invoked those memories for me, you know, and you probably look at these images like, you know, the glasses and think, oh, I've seen something like that. On the upper left-hand corner, my other grandmother used to have this, I don't even know what to call it, but it was like a plastic chalice. That's what I think of it. And you open it up and it had this big like powder puff inside. I don't even know what it was for, but I would go to her house and I would go in that little back room that nobody went into. And I would open that thing and take out the powder and like powder myself with it. And just that experience and the textures that were everywhere. So those objects just kind of made me feel connected to that safety and that place. Her house was lost in a gang fire. And so all those things that I built my early kind of visual language on, and it wasn't her house, she was actually renting, but those objects I kind of built myself, my artistic self on, they were all lost. And so I started collecting. I started trying to make those connections again with other objects. And they didn't necessarily have to be my actual family. It was more of like those objects that I saw and felt like I had a connection with. And so that's where I began. So what you're looking at right now is undergrad. In undergrad, I started painting her. So the image on the upper left and the upper right, that was my Auntie Shug. I would paint her. I was an oil painter. That was the first kind of paint I tried to use. And I would paint portraits and then kind of these acrylic geometric things, images. And I'm not really sure where I was going, but I wanted to make artwork that was about my experience. But when I would sit in critiques, every time it was the conversation would be led to, you know, oh, your work is about the experience of the African-American female, and it never was. It was literally, I wanted my work to be about me, about my Auntie Shug, about my family, about my life. But the figures that I was painting, they were Black. So automatically the conversation turned that way. And after a while, I got really frustrated. And so, you know, I also like the geometric work. So I moved away from the portraits. And In grad school, I went to grad school in Boston at Tufts in the museum school, and I started working with fabrics. My mom made all kinds of stuff. When I was a kid, she would sew, and I never really knew how to sew, but I would watch her put her foot on the pedal, and I would watch her cut stuff. And so therefore, I felt like I knew how to sew. So in grad school, I started making work that was a little less figurative. It was still about the same things. I still wanted to communicate my feelings about the world and my confusion about my place in that world, not feeling Black enough, not feeling white enough, if there's even such a thing, or being representative of a whole group of people. Like, how can you come to me and expect me to speak for an entire group of people? I would rather just speak for myself. I'm not a female artist. I'm not a Black artist. I'm an artist that is a female. I'm an artist that is Black. And it was a struggle for me. So I started working with fabric and hair weave. So what you're seeing here are the fabric pieces. And the ugly duckling. I felt a connection to the character of the ugly duckling. So all through grad school, and this is just like a random sampling. This was before I had a digital camera, so I'm lucky I found any of this. I was just really kind of obsessed with fabric and pairing up patterns. You know, it made me think of those dresses my grandma used to wear in the couch and the rug or the carpet in the house, and all of those mismatched patterns and that chenille bedspread in the back room, all of that. And I started working that way. And I had a little bit less of those kind of problematic conversations, you know, that I struggled with. I was able to speak more about how I was feeling, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. But it was exciting, you know. And you get out of grad school, you're like, where am I gonna go next? I'm gonna produce. I had a show at the Tampa Museum of Art. I was making, and then, you know, and then I became a teacher, and it was amazing. And I spread that to the students. But as a teacher, I am super curious and I want to know about the world. So every year I would kind of learn something new. So what you're looking at, it feels unrelated, but to me, it does. I noticed that my work is always these singular objects made up of smaller pieces. And so I decided that I wanted to know how to do mosaics. So I found someone to teach me. And I started working with glass and tile. It met all my needs for color and pattern. If you think about those images that I was doing in grad or in undergrad that were like more geometric, it's basically the same thing, but with tessera, with glass and tile and ceramic pieces. And then I started moving kind of 3D. Can I make it relief? And I kept asking all these questions. Can I start picking up things outside? Can the work be a representation of a time period, of a stretch of time? If I'm collecting over time, can I incorporate time into my process? So for a while there, I was producing mosaics, but it still did not spark the conversation that I wanted it to spark. So I had to do more. And so that's where my relief work came in. And this is where I started. What you're looking at is a series that I started. And I'm just giving you like a little bit, like I worked on this. I did a series of these and then it moved. But notice it's fabric. You can't maybe tell from these images, but it's mosaic. So it's glass, there is clay, there is wood, collage, handmade paper. I pretty much, all those things that I was learning before kind of come together in these pieces. There's oil paint, there's driftwood. I would be able to fill my dragon's hoard. I would be able to walk through my life and collect and produce. But it didn't meet that emotional need yet that my undergrad work met. My undergrad work was about people and family. And my grad work was about how I felt about myself. And I still, when I was doing the mosaics, when I was doing this relief work, I wasn't really able to talk about that. It was more of like pretty pictures. And I enjoyed the process, but I hadn't really arrived at that place yet. So in my curiosity, I went online. It's 2023. We can go online. We can find out anything. And I learned how to, I did like an elementary school project, what you're looking at on the right. It's like burlap. I took burlap and some yarn, and I watched some YouTube videos. And I was like, how do I do this? Some DIYs. And the past 3 years, I go and I stay in a cabin with my friend, and I teach myself something, or her mom taught me something. And I figure out, how can I get to that place where I can say what I want to say with clarity, and not have, how I look impacted. I want to have these conversations with people, and I don't want them to look at me and look at how I look and decide they know what my work is about. So, I'm constantly just digging and digging. What can I learn? What can I do? How can I keep clarifying my voice? And that led me to the weavings, which that need for texture, color, it meets that for me. But once again, I'm still not talking about those things that really mean a lot to me. And I'm still not having those conversations with strangers and with the people close to me that I want to have. So all of these, steps that I'm making in my work, all of these transitions were leading me pretty much to the place that I'm at now, which is the work that you see in Fresh Squeezed. So you can see I got a little bit of fabric and mosaic and weaving and oil paint and acrylic and, some things that are more figurative and kind of non-representational. It's a little bit of everything. And this was the first piece that I made. After learning how to weave, I made a DIY loom, and it was small, pretty small, about 36 inches by 24. And I loved it. And then I said to myself, can I make a really big one? So I made one that was big enough to fit on the top of my car, the hood of my car. It was about 6 feet by 8 feet. And I said, what can I do with this? And this is the first piece that I made that I felt really excited about, where I felt like the things that I wanted to bring into the work were starting to happen, where I was able to combine the mosaic and the textures. I want you to want to touch them. I want you to walk up to them and see something familiar. I want you to, experience. I want the wind to blow and them to move in the wind. So this was the first piece that I made. And from here is where my circles began. And this is my new obsession. And this is the work you see in Fresh Squeeze, are my circles. And what is starting to happen with my work, which I'm kind of in love with, and I am so grateful for this journey and these conversations that I'm able to have with people, is the work is starting to open conversations. So this particular piece, we have had to love in order to live. Love has been our survival. I grew up in a situation where I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. And there were things that I was taught, there were things that were said that I had a real hard time with, that I was curious about, that I needed more information about, that I struggled with. And so as an adult, I have a lot of, same-sex friends that mean the world to me, that I wouldn't want to experience the world without. And they were so important to me as a kid. And I didn't know how to take what I was being taught in church and what I was experiencing in my real life and make the two connect. And, you know, this particular piece was about a couple that I know that have been through so much together. And their love is really the record of their time, of why they're together. I mean, brain surgeries and deaths in the family, and love is all of it. And if you look at this piece closely ever, you might see the gold tickets. I love to collect objects that I create a narrative for, or that other people have meaning, because the things that I thought were meaningful burned in the fire. They don't exist anymore. There's nothing that's really being passed down to me. So I find those things that other people have connections to, and I use them, and I'm wonderfully satisfied by their connection. That feels just as good to me. So those little tickets, I went to an estate sale, and a gentleman was being put into a facility, and he and his wife have been married for years and years, and they ran a jewelry store together. And every time they sold a piece of jewelry, he would write down all of the information, and they would keep the little yellow tickets. And so when I went to this estate sale, it was just cigar boxes full of these tickets. And for me, I thought somebody else might think they're trash, but for me, they became this beautiful record of their time together. It was like just linear record of this time they spent together. And I really wanted the two to come together in this piece. And then there's the hard, my friend Josh, that is one of the partners in this couple. He's so hard, but he's also so soft. There's that hard edge to him, out in public. But when it came to David being in the hospital, he was there every day, showing his love every single day. So there's something so soft and beautiful, and there's that longevity about that I really love. And the watch that you can see, I went to a garage sale and I told the people what I was making. She asked me, and she knew I wanted to buy the watch, and she said it was her dad's, and she wanted me to have it because it had that history. The pieces for me are the pieces that would have burned in the fire. They're the things that mean something to other people. And I am perfectly satisfied with taking that and making them a part of my story, and taking their history and incorporating it into my pieces so that there's meaning. Maybe they come to this piece and they see something familiar and they say, I remember this, I remember that, I feel like this is about that, I read this. I want them to connect with it. And I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about how they feel and the memories that the pieces conjure for them. So this is another piece: strength when I'm weak, love when I cannot love myself, the one who chooses to see me. So for me, motherhood, that's motherhood. That's how my mom was. Give you your last of everything. Like, there, thick or thin, you can talk to her about anything, anytime, any place. So this particular piece was about love, motherhood, but not genetics, not that kind of connection, not gender and a genderless love. I'm sure that many people have had that experience where you were there for someone, where you were able to tap into that energy, where you mothered someone, where you felt like you were their support system. And this piece was about that for me. And there are these tags that hang from it. And I really reached out to other people. I wanted them to tell me about those opportunities that they had, those moments where someone either was there for them, where they were able to kind of tap into that motherhood vein, or where they were there for someone else. And so there are all these objects that are in this piece. There's a christening gown, there's baby shoes, blanket, first Bible. There are all these objects, but at the same time, there are more of gendered objects. You might be a mother, but you might be going out on the town. So a beautiful clutch and belts. And I don't disguise the objects. I want you to walk up to them and feel like, I had that belt, or my first Bible looks like that in that experience. I had a friend that walked into the space and he didn't know what the work was about. And he said he thought about his grandmother when he came into the space. And to me, that was just beautiful and amazing that he thought about his grandmother. And then he walked up to the piece and he had his own experience. That's really what I'm interested in, that energy, that story, that safe place that other people are able to find, that my grandmother was for me, that safe place. So that, was this piece. And in my mind, I feel like this piece will never end. I would love for people to constantly be adding to it. I imagine that it will never ever end, and someone can write their story and tie it on there, or their moment, their date, when they were transformed, when they experienced that beautiful moment, when their best friend's mom was there for them, when their best friend's dad was there for them, when we make our own family, when that other person was there for them to uplift them and to give them the last. That's how I think of my mom, and that's how I think of motherhood. And so that was this piece for me. This one. This one's kind of multiple places. The idea of womanhood and Eve, and, the stories we tell each other. I found this book in an antique store, and it was called One Girl to Another. And in the gallery space, I let people flip through it and read it. And it's about a woman's first menstrual cycle. And it is an older book. And so the things that you'll read in it are really interesting. And I love that it's the record of a time, a record of how a people thought about themselves, communication. If you look at the piece, you may notice that there are corn husk dolls. I never experienced a corn husk doll before, but one of my close friends, her mom died when she was 13, and she's kept these corn husk dolls for 42 years. And these objects, she knows they have meaning, but they've lost meaning to her. And so she knows what my work is about, and she gave them to me. And I wanted to kind of repurpose them. So they're all women, and they're all the women's work and the communications that are between women. And they're all these, if you look closely at this piece, it's scarves and beads and all of the figures are females, and they're all, at work with their children. And, there's embroidery there. There's all these objects, and it's red. So have it, go where you'd like to go with that. And I love that there's that history with it, that someone can walk up to it and feel that her historical objects were able to transform in this piece. And every time she sees it, she has this really, visceral connection with it. And anyone else who has a connection with a corn husk doll can have that same connection. I think about dolls when I look at it. I think about how I felt about dolls when I was a kid. When I look at it, I look at the basket. I think about the womb and that connection as well when I look at it. So this piece for me was, interesting in all of its ways that it could be. And the last circle, which is not really the last circle because I just started these in January. So what you're seeing, this is the last circle, which actually was the first circle. She left me silver spoons. I always wish that there was some object that was passed down to me. I don't even know what it would need to be, but I thought silver spoons, and I get my objects from literally anywhere, as I'm sure you see. And so for this one, I wanted to use that concept. And so I zoomed in so you could kind of see that there's actually silver spoons in this one. And it makes me think about like Cinderella and transforming your life, and, that bedspread, and those objects that are fancy, and there's gold leaf on it, all of those things that, you go into a cotillion, you're dressing up. Those are the things that I think about, that I wish there was some sort of record, or I could have some sort of experience, which is why most of my pieces are a narrative of a history I don't have. I don't. have any of that, but it's made up. It's my kind of made up history with these people that I interact with. So that's this piece with a bird and the silver spoon. Now there's more. And then this one is 40 years and yet still partners. And I got a scarf, and you'll notice if you ever got up close to it that you can tell where it's from. I don't try to hide where the objects are from. I really want to kind of repurpose, transform objects that other people don't necessarily see as having those meaning anymore. You know, like the cornhusk doll. She knew they had meaning, but they really didn't for her. But for me, they do. So I use the male figures in this one, 40 years and yet still. And you'll notice that they're kind of a traditional colors in terms of gender. The pink one is 40 years and yet still. And the blue one is We Thrive as One. And the two are meant to display together. And as you notice, the height differential, when I'm thinking about like couples and how they are in each other's space, this one for me kind of represents that. Those kind of genderized things. There's purses and hats in this one. There's ties and scarves and, you know, objects from your home, all are incorporated into these pieces that I love. So let me take a sip before it's all over for me. So that is my work. Where it is right now, it's all literally very, 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 very new. I started, as I said, in January, and that is currently where I'm going. And it's been how all of those experiences that I had before have come together to create work that I feel strongly about, that allows me to communicate with the world in a way that feels powerful and successful to me.
Thank you, Latonya.
Thank you.
That was terrific. So that is the end of our artist presentation. Is there any, I'm looking at the chat. I think I'm looking at the chat. Does anybody have any questions for the artists that you'd like to ask them? Somebody has a question for Denise. Where does your inspiration for color use come from? Oh, you're muted.
Yep, sorry.
No, there you go.
Hi, thanks for the question. So a lot of it actually has to do with Miami, in fact, because I grew up in Chile, but my grandparents lived in Miami, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I would come visit them like every, I guess, winter in Chile, summer here. And there were all these like neon colors and like things that, you know, attractive, shiny, bright, neon, very, very poppy colors that I guess like, to me, they represent Miami, and I never thought that I would end up living in Miami, but weirdly, life brought me back here. And it's interesting because I feel like a very deep connection to the city due to the history of my grandparents having lived here. But it's actually also been very hard to make the shift of like, this is not a vacation place anymore. But yeah, a lot of these materials I would buy when I came here, like neon pink tape and things that at the time we didn't have in Chile. In fact, I actually remember like this blue pom-poms, like the cheerleading shiny blue pom-poms and things like that. I would take them back home and like save them. I didn't want to use them. I didn't want to lose them. Like I kept them very close to me because I didn't want to run out of them until next year when I would come visit them. And so that's maybe the genesis of my hoarding for materials. But then when I came to the US, I was like, you know what? I can go all out. Now it's all excess. I'm here. So I think there was also a part of it that reflects through the use of color and materials. I don't know if I answered the question, but I guess ultimately it's a mix of taste, growing up in that era, and this family history. And some sort of formal choices too.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I'm looking at your presentation, that I know you haven't lived in Florida a long time, but your color sense definitely says Floridian in a good
Yeah.
way. I love that. Maureen has a question. I have a question for Latonya. How did you know when you saw something so many years after your childhood experiences that this would portray your thoughts to the public? I love your work and feel so connected to it.
I was super shy in my work, like those objects that I would find would create conversation. So for me, the stories that connect to those objects would tell me, if one person you can have that conversation with, then there's probably 10, 20, 30 other people that you can have a conversation with.
She says, you're so right. I don't know if everyone else can hear that, see that. Any other questions? Here. Can everyone see the chat? I should know this, but I don't. I don't know if I have to read it all out loud.
For the sake of the recording, I think so.
Yeah, okay, so it's not going to show up in the recording.
Maybe.
Says, no questions, appreciate all the talks, very interesting perspectives from everyone. Ooh, Latonya has a question for Leeann. You want to just ask it?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Latonya, you're muted.
Okay. Do you ever see yourself working with color, even if it's a limited palette?
So before this, and I didn't show it because I kind of hate those paintings, even though other people like them. Before this, I was an oil painter. And you can't let me near color because I want to use all of it all the time. I understand color theory. I teach color theory, but I want to use it all. I don't care if yellow is supposed to go purple and red's supposed to go green. I want to use everything all together, and it's like a vomit. So I initially went to black and white to try and solve that issue, but I ended up loving it for other reasons, so it all worked out. I do use color in my prints though, because it's harder to justify buying a ton of ink in all these different colors. I also am a printmaker. I make etching.
Ashley asks Latonya, what medium do you enjoy working with most, since you do a little bit of everything?
All of them. Does that count as the answer? It really depends, but all of them. Yeah. To me, the current work is like Sudoku or a puzzle. If you've ever put a puzzle together, you sit and you obsess and you try to fit the pieces and so maybe I should say puzzles. Puzzles.
Puzzles as a medium. Any other questions? I'll say when we're selecting the artists for this show, so like I said, we usually have 120 to 150 applicants for this show, and there's several of us in the room. It's the exhibition staff and the education staff at the Morian that looks at these And we're kind of at first just picking the work that we like, and then we kind of narrow it down to about 25 artists. And then I kind of look at them all individually, and at that point I'm not really thinking of what goes together, like, is this person's work going to look good with this person, because I don't really care about that. The only thing that I'm looking for is a diversity in ideas and geographic diversity if possible. I don't want all artists from the Tampa Bay area, and also, or any one area, I guess, but also diversity in medium. You know, I don't want, we tend to get a lot of painters, of course, for this exhibition. I don't want to pick 6 painters, so we're kind of looking for a little bit of everything. And then sometimes when we start putting the show together and deciding who's going to be in what space, because all of these artists, if anyone on here has not seen the show in person, which I highly encourage you to do, each artist has their own section. It's not mixed together. It's kind of interesting to see the correlation between some of the work that I didn't necessarily notice when we were selecting the work, but everything just tends to work really well together, even though there's a lot of diversity in ideas and mediums and execution of the work. Now, like tonight, hearing Latonya and Denise talk, their work does not look anything alike, but when Denise, when you were talking about how you were learning how to weave, and I had been to Latonya's studio and she was talking about how she taught herself to weave, and just the way that you both accumulate objects coming from a completely different point of view and with completely different results. But I love that connection there. So, and this is not that big of a deal, but I think it's kind of interesting. This is the first year that all 6 of the artists have been women, or as a nod to what Latonya said, 6 artists who also happen to be women. So again, not planned, it just organically happened that way. So, which is pretty cool. So if there are no other questions, we will end the talk, but I do want to say again,
I have one question for Latonya. Do you always find, I mean, is it a process in which you go to places to find the objects that you want to connect, or the people you want to connect with, or do you get people like, hey, I have this, I want to give you that?
It's growing. I've been finding objects, so it's very hard. But as people know what I'm looking for, they start saying, oh, well, I've got, and they start to want to participate, which is cool because they want to make the art with me. Basically, is how I'm thinking of it.
I had this interesting experience that I spent a few months in Southern Alabama at a place called Dothan. I was living there, and I had a small show there with similar work. And somebody came to me and with a whole letter, and she gave me like cables that she had been keeping for 30 years because her mother used to work at the telephone company, and she thought I could do something with it. And she's like, you're my new favorite art. Like, it was very nice of her, but I felt like, oh my God, this is too much pressure. I kind of like, she's like, and if not, it doesn't matter. You can throw them away or something. But, you know, I would love to maybe one day find this cable somewhere. And it just made me think of I mean, I felt very moved by it in a weird way. Like I'm keeping this as my, you know, like it's in a place that I don't want to touch. I never feel like I can put it on any piece because it has too much personal value, and my work is really not about that. But anyways, I just wanted to share that because I feel like you were the right person to give that.
Right. That right there is what I like, though. Like, I like that, exactly what you're talking about.
So give them to Latonya.
I could, but then I feel like, am I offending her because she gave this to me? This whole thing became very valuable, and it's really 2 pieces of a red cable, you know what I mean? But I'll think about it. Maybe I'll ask her if I can hand it to another artist who would make a better use of it.
Yeah, it's part of your artistic process, you know, giving it to somebody else. Yeah,
that's true.
Well, again, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to you three artists who spoke tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to put your talk together. Thank you for being in the show. We have had such a great response to it. And it is up, all of you, through June 22nd. If you are in the St. Pete area, please come by and see it. Please join us on June 8th at 6 p.m. to hear from the other 3 of the 6 artists in Fresh Squeeze 7. And if there are no other questions, we will go ahead and sign off. So thank you everybody for being here.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Good night.